If you're looking for something a little bit lighter, you should check out the latest videos from our other channel, Paranormally Listed. Brookfield is a small town in Connecticut. In 1981, it was home to 50-year-old Alan Bono. Bono had only lived in Brookfield briefly. He moved to the States from Australia, first living in Florida, then relocating to Connecticut. His sister lived in Brookfield and owned some kennels. She asked Bono to come help her manage them. There he met 26-year-old Debbie Glatzel and her 19-year-old fiancé, Arnie Cheney Johnson. The couple lived in an apartment beside the kennels, and Debbie worked as a groomer at the kennels. On February 16, 1981, Bono, Johnson, and Debbie were spending the day together. But a fight broke out between Bono and Johnson over Debbie. Debbie tried to separate the two. Johnson stabbed Bono multiple times with a 5-inch pocket knife. Tragically, 40-year-old Alan Bono died from the stab wounds. 19-year-old Arnie Johnson fled after the stabbing, but he was arrested an hour later. When the police questioned him, Johnson said that the devil made him do it. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Number 3. Deborah Mackey. On February 9, 1982, a farmer from Plainview, Texas, made a horrifying discovery in a ditch just east of Plainview. It was the nude body of a headless woman. The head was nowhere to be found. The pathologist, Dr. Ralph Erdman, believed that the cause of death was decapitation. Her wrists had been bound with her bra. It's also believed that she had been sexually assaulted. The pathologist believed that it was a white woman between the ages of 18 and 25, and she had never been pregnant. No one came forward to claim the body. Around the same time, the lower jawbone of a human was found nearly 700 miles away in a desert outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. In October of that year, a skull was found in the same area. Experts concluded that the jaw and the skull came from the same person. No other remains were found in the area. There was a 5-inch fracture near the base of the skull. The jaw and the skull bone were sent to pathologist Dr. Ralph Erdman. According to the Associated Press, he was 95% convinced it belonged to the headless Jane Doe because they were both of a white female from the same age group and had the same delicate type of bone structure. A year later, in 1983, alleged serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the murder. He admitted to dumping the head outside of Scottsdale. Lucas was later charged with the murder, but the charges were eventually dropped after Lucas was convicted of 11 murders and sentenced to death. In 1993, the skull and the remains were buried together. But problems with the case started to emerge. In the early 1990s, it was revealed that pathologist Dr. Ralph Erdman had falsified records on over 100 autopsies. He also mishandled evidence. For example, he kept blood and urine samples in the same fridge as jelly and pasta sauce. In 1992, he agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 7 felony counts involving falsified autopsies. He was sentenced to 10 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. He also surrendered his medical license. Also, people began to doubt that Henry Lee Lucas killed as many people as he said he did. He claimed he killed over 250 people, but only 3 victims were confirmed. He also recanted his confessions. Many of his confessions have been discredited. In 2015, the body was exhumed and DNA samples were taken. After the exhumation, it was determined that the skull did not belong to the body. A workable DNA sample could not be developed by the crime lab. In 2018, the police asked the nonprofit group, the DNA Doe Project, to help identify the woman. It took their lab over a year to develop a DNA profile. Then, they learned something surprising. The headless woman was not white, she was black. Then in 2021, they started the process of genetic genealogy. Then in November 2022, they learned that she was 20-year-old Deborah Mackey from Lubbock, Texas. In June 2023, the police announced that after 41 years, the headless woman had been identified. Mackey's family had reported her missing on January 6, 1982, about a month before her body was found. She was last seen alive 5 days earlier, on New Year's Day. Not much about Mackey was made public. The police are currently investigating the circumstances of her disappearance. They are also trying to figure out who killed her. The skull of the person found in Arizona has not been identified. Number 2. Jerry Harrison. On August 24, 1986, some hunters were on an abandoned trail in Caney Valley in Claiborne County, Tennessee. They found some skeletal remains. The medical examiner believed it was a white man, probably between 30 and 40 years old. He had been shot to death. The medical examiner thought he had been dead 6 months to a year before his remains were found. But that was all the investigators knew about the victim. No ID was found and no one claimed the body, so he was labeled a John Doe. They also had no idea who killed him and why they killed him. The University of Tennessee Forensic Anthropology Center kept some of the remains. 29 years after the remains were discovered, they sent a sample to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for DNA testing. They were able to create a DNA profile. They submitted the DNA profile to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, and the National Missing Unidentified Person System, NamUs, but no match was found. 7 years went by and no progress was made in the case. Then in December 2022, the DNA profile was sent to Arthrim Incorporated, a private lab in Texas that specializes in genetic genealogy. They found relatives living in Arkansas. Agents with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation worked with the police in Arkansas. They talked to 2 people who said they had a brother who went missing decades earlier. DNA testing was confirmed and confirmed the man's identity 37 years after his remains were found. He was Jerry Harrison of Little Rock, Arkansas. In 1982, 4 years before his remains were found, when Harrison was 25, he left for a cross-country trip. Unfortunately, discovering Harrison's identity did not provide any clues as to who may have killed him. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation is currently investigating his murder. They hope that anyone with information about the murder will come forward. Number 1. Patricia Newsome. On August 16, 1975, a truck driver was making a delivery to a department store in East Haven, Connecticut. Behind the store was a drainage ditch. Something odd in the ditch caught his eye. Something big was wrapped up in a tarp in the ditch. It turned out to be the dead body of a young woman. She had been bound and gagged. The cause of death had been asphyxiation by suffocation. Afterward, her body was wrapped up in a tarp and then was tied up with a tennis wire. It is believed that the body had originally been stuffed into a nearby 30-inch drainage pipe, but thanks to heavy rain, it was washed out into the ditch. The medical examiner thought she had only been dead for about a week. The woman didn't have any identification on her. She had brown hair and brown or hazel eyes. She was 5'5" or 5'6" and weighed around 125 pounds. It was believed that she was from a middle or upper class family. She had extensive dental work and she may have had cosmetic surgery to reduce the size of her nose. The investigators also didn't think she was local because she didn't match any missing persons reports. When no one claimed her body, she was buried in the State Street Cemetery in Hamden, Connecticut. An unspecified item that was found with the body and the fact that the killer hid the body led them to believe that the killer was local. Also, there was paint splatter on the tarp, so they thought that the killer may have been a painter. Eventually, the police did develop a suspect, a transsexual woman named Samantha Glenner. Glenner was born Glenn Robert Asborn. On October 4th, 1984, Glenner's friend, 59-year-old Amelia Cave, who lived in Sullivan, Maine, went missing. That day, Glenner had cashed a check from Cave's account. Glenner was interviewed, and based on those interviews, they searched a beach where she kept her boat. It was about a mile from her home. Close to her boat, buried in the sand, was the dead body of Amelia Cave. She had been suffocated to death. Glenner was convicted of her murder in March 1985. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The police saw similarities between the murder of Cave and the murder of Jane Doe. Also, Glenner was in East Haven when Jane Doe was murdered, but the police never found enough evidence to charge her. Samantha Glenner was released from prison in 2009. Eventually, the murder of Jane Doe became the coldest case in East Haven. In 2020, two captains with the police department decided to take on the case. Their first course of action was trying to identify the young woman, but they ran into their first problem when they went to exhume the body. In the decades since the murder, the cemetery where her body was buried had been abandoned. Also, the record keeping at the cemetery had been poor. The investigators used a hand-drawn map to find the body. The exhumation was performed in July 2022, but there was a problem. The body that they exhumed was male, so that body was interred again. Then they used ground-penetrating radar. 3 weeks later, in August 2022, they exhumed a second body. They determined it was the Jane Doe. A sample of her DNA was taken, then it was sent to Identifiers International for genealogical testing. That summer, the investigators also released a composite image of the woman to the media. However, no one identified her. After the DNA profile was created, it was submitted to the National Missing Persons Bank, also known as NamUs. Then in April 2023, a match was found. A woman named Marianne Newsom Collette had been looking for her sister, Trisha Nome, who went by the name Trisha, for decades. Marianne was 9 when her 18-year-old sister disappeared. In November 2021, Marianne had set up a Facebook page dedicated to finding her sister. In 1972, Marianne and Trisha's family lived in New Jersey, and Trisha was sent to a boarding school in the Monticello area of New York. Then, sometime in 1974, Trisha and a friend ran away from the school. It was believed that she was heading to a family member's home in Maine. After Trisha ran away from the school, she was never heard from again. So after 49 years, the disappearance of Trisha Newsom was finally solved. But her murder remains unsolved. At a press conference where the police announced that she had been identified, they said that their next steps were determining what boarding school she ran away from and talking to the friend who ran away with her. Hopefully, we'll have an update in the near future about this case and the murders of Deborah Mackey and Jerry Harrison. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.